We're going to get a photo first. And if you are putting this on social media, would you please hashtag APA Day of Debates. APA Day of Debates.
Here we go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
We good? All right, you may take your seats. Class photo. Thank you. Again, thank you all for being here today. Unfortunately, Tony Lane and Sarah Sanders not with us today, but we thank the candidates who did come here to debate today. Candidates have their own numbers to determine seat order up here, also opening statement order, also the closing statement order. In this debate, each candidate will have the opportunity to make a 1.5 minute opening statement for each question. You're going to have 1.5 minutes to answer. After everyone answers, we'll have another 30 seconds for a rebuttal or to clarify your remarks. So that's how we're going to operate this. And then at the end of the debate, each of you will have 1.5 minutes to make closing statements. Official timekeepers are here. They give you a 30-second warning, and they'll let you know when your time is up. And we would certainly ask that you help us stay on time today, because as you see, we have a full table of candidates. So please stay to your time limits. 1.5 minutes opening statements. And based on the draw, our first opening statement will be Doc Washburn. Mr. Washburn, your opening statement.
Thank you very much. My name is Doc Washburn. I am a radio talk show host who got fired by the company I work for because I refused to go along with the vaccine mandate. That was last October. Since then, I've been doing a podcast at DocWashburnShow.com. As governor, if I'm elected, I plan to drastically cut the size and scope of our state government to get them off your back and out of your pocket. My plan is to get rid of the personal income tax, not gradually, 0.2% per year, as Governor Hutchinson and Sarah Huckabee Sanders believe in, but a lot quicker. I mean, as quickly as possible. I plan to get rid of the income tax on small businesses. I plan to get rid of the tax on used goods. I recently bought a 2013 Honda Accord, 85,000 miles on it, $15,000 without a DMV. Everybody's so nice, and they're like, "Okay, honey, now you got to call and get your assessment." Oh, man, great. And the lady on the phone was real nice. Said, "Okay, you owe us $1,038 tax." I'm like, "That's weird. I thought the guy that bought the car the first time." That's right, and you gotta pay it too. When you trade it in, the next guy, okay, great. Our state government is trolling moms on Facebook trying to sell used clothes their children have grown out of. Oh, you owe us a tax on that. It's crazy. We are one of the highest tax states in the country, certainly the highest tax in the Mid-South, and we keep on hearing that, oh, we're out of time? Okay. I thought I might get a 2-second warning. Well, there will be more. Thank you so much.
Oh, we've got plenty of people to get into. All right, Ms. Sanderson Mays, you have our second opening statement. You got 90 seconds.
Okay, well, that's not much.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. I'm so delighted to be here. My name is Sue Paul, Cypress Mays, and Cypress is spelled with an S, not an X. I'm running for governor because I can't stand the sideline and watch what's going on. And you have a candidate that's running that is dividing our state by class. And I'm running because I know that Arkansas deserves better leadership. I came here as an immigrant, didn't speak English. I know what it was like to be poor. And my mother came here with a master's degree. She spoke 7 languages in verbal written form and was not above her to work at a chicken plant because she didn't qualify for any other position. So my kids, this is home to me. It is a shame that we have leadership. This is that Arkansas is ranked 40th poorest state in the United States of America. And you have all these leadership talk about how they can turn the state around. Our kids are going to bed hungry. Our citizens have no jobs. They have to decide between food and medicine. Our teachers are struggling. Our health care There is so much going on here that you need leadership that will tell you the truth, will be honest, be transparent about the budget. And I know that some candidates have expressed that they want to cut taxes, but you have to remember, when you cut taxes, there's consequences. There's other programs that will be eliminated because of them taxes. I mean, taxes hold our citizens. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much. My name is Sue Paul, and I'm running for governor of Arkansas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our third opening statement will be Mr. Harrington. Mr. Harrington.
I am honored to be here, sitting beside such talented and courageous people trying to run for governor. Life is strange. If someone would have told me back in 2016, whenever I came back to be a missionary in China, and sleeping in my friend's living room with my entire family, that I'd be running for governor, I would absolutely not believe it. Life is strange. And I'm running for governor for one thing: to make sure that Arkansas and America hold its end of the promise of liberty. That is the one reason I am running. We do not have nobility here. We do not have rulers like kings and queens. The people are the kings and queens. And I'm running to help empower the people and hold the government accountable. Coming back in 2016, I got a job working with Arkansas Department of Corrections as a chaplain. I learned some things about power. I've learned some things about people abusing their power. And the one thing I want to do is to inject ethical leadership, inject integrity into our state government. It is something that we need. Are we truly going to be the people that we say we are? And as governor, I hope to instill that ethical leadership in the executive branch.
Thank you. Next opening statement, Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Rex, and thank you to the Arkansas Press Association for having us here today. I grew up as a kid whose father was diagnosed with mental illness at 2 years old, and he was placed in the Arkansas State Hospital in Little Rock. Mental illness has been a big part of my life through my father and having to grow up, the poverty that created. Thankfully, I was met with safety nets that helped my family escape poverty.
Mr. Martin, can you make sure that mic is on? I'm not sure that.
Maybe I turned it on.
There we go.
Hey, I can actually hear. Did anyone hear anything I just said?
We can start over here. Yeah.
Can we start over?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just introducing myself, and first I thank Rex and I thank the Arkansas Press Association for having us here today. I was talking about the way I grew up, and when I was 2 years old, my father was diagnosed with mental illness and placed in the state hospital here in Little Rock, and I grew up with the stigma of mental illness and the poverty that created. Thankfully, there were safety nets in place that helped my family make it over that hump. And I hear what Mr. Harrington was saying. It's really humbling to think that a kid that came from my background could be sitting here today talking to you running for governor. I want to be the governor of mental health for Arkansas. Arkansas has a mental health crisis. I want to help solve that. I was elected to the state legislature after 9/11 in 2001. I felt like it was my patriotic duty to get involved in public service. And I served as majority leader back when the Democrats were in charge of the Arkansas House of Representatives. We had 72 out of 100. I believe in bringing people together. I was out of state politics. I'm a lawyer, practiced law 25 years. I got back involved though for my daughter's generation. They have grown up seeing the wrong brand of politics. Politics is something that should bring us together and work on the pressing needs of Arkansas, including economic development. That is the key. In our rural areas of Arkansas, they're struggling. Roads are horrible. Police officers working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Firefighters making $350 a month. We have a crisis, and it's a crisis that good government, sound government, and the right leadership can fix. I want to become your governor so that I can be that person.
All right, thank you. Next opening statement, Mr. Russell.
Hi, my name is James Russell. Everyone just call me Russ. Background in healthcare, did physician credentialing for the state medical board for a time, transitioned over to medical staff coordinator at Arkansas Children's Hospital, and then for the past 8 years, my wife and I run New Dawn Counseling based here in Little Rock, and in the wake of COVID, going statewide, offering telehealth and mental health services across the state. As Jay mentioned before, we are facing a mental health crisis. It stems into an addictions crisis, into disenfranchisement, into apathy, many different things. What I want to represent is a voice for the people of our state, and the majority of the people. We look at the voting totals, we see that we are ranked dead last in the entire nation. Everybody looks at it and tries to analyze it different ways. I look at that and I see a body of people who feel disenfranchised and feel they have not been heard and therefore have no reason to actually get up and try to have a voice. And so my candidacy and also my governance would be to show them that they do matter, to be a voice for the people, to show that we are first and foremost Arkansans and equals, that the position or the title does not put one over another. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And Mr. Jones, final opening statement.
Thank you all for being here today, and thank you to the Arkansas Press Association for hosting this debate. My name is Chris Jones, and I'm running for governor of Arkansas. Growing up in Pine Bluff and being raised in Hughes and Stevens as well, I watched my parents and my grandparents make sacrifices to build a better life for our family. It was through them that I first learned those time-tested Arkansas values of faith, hope, and hard work. But here's the truth. Arkansas is tired. Tired of everyone telling us that we're destined for poverty. Tired of being at the bottom of education and the top in drug addiction. Tired of revenge politics where you can't support a candidate of the other party without fear of retribution. Our politics tells us that we have to have an enemy. This brand of politics thrives on creating enemies out of anything and makes us afraid of everything. Arkansans are ready to reject fear and solve problems together. Yes, there will be disagreements and conflict, but that doesn't mean we make our neighbors into our enemies. I'm running because every Arkansan deserves high quality education, solid infrastructure, and economic opportunities. Together, we can realize these things. Together, we can address our challenges. Together, we can make space for all Arkansans to realize their unique potential. And together, we can win for all Arkansans. I'm Chris Jones, and I'd love to have you vote.
Thank you very much. Let's get to our questions. We're going to start this one, far end from me down there with Mr. Harrington. We'll come right down the table. You'll have a minute and a half, and then you'll have 30 seconds as we come back down again. Here's the same question to all of you. What is the single most important economic issue facing Arkansans today? And if elected governor, how do you plan to address it? Mr. Harrington, we'll start with you. You have a minute and a half.
Well, the number one thing facing Arkansans is really the struggle for survival, in my opinion. Being able to have a light bill taken care of, being able to put food on the table for their families, being able to take care of their necessities, and not being able to do that, it leaves people in a state of complete crisis. Every day we're just trying to get by, we're trying to make it through. And as governor, I hope to work towards reforming our occupational licensing. There's plenty of people in this state that have skills, that have knowledge, they just don't have the paper. They didn't have the money to buy that degree in a sense. But what I'd like to do is to try to level that playing field so people can demonstrate their competency to work in these professional fields, or being a barber, being a plumber, or things like that. We have to remove some of that red tape so that we can move forward in our economy.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. COVID-19 took an incredible toll on our small businesses. We're almost a small business week, and Main Street businesses and our family farms. We've looked at ways to address this. In many of our rural areas, they were already in the hole before COVID-19. They're facing drug epidemic with opioids. They hadn't recovered from the methamphetamine epidemic. So there's major problems out there. We want to grow the economy. We think Governor Hutchinson's done a good job of bringing jobs into the state. We think Governor Beebe before him did. We want to lead in that manner. But we also want to bring public sector jobs into the state. Arkansas is last among southern states in federal public sector jobs. We would like to work with the federal delegation and the president to bring high quality public sector jobs into the state. We have a plan for doing that. The main thing though is it's absolutely right. People are struggling all over our state, but particularly in rural areas.
Some of our urban areas, I've had the chance to work with the urban poor in Little Rock as a pastor in an inner city church. And when you see kids that are hungry, when you see families that are struggling, working jobs, you know that you want to be a governor that's for the people, that helps lift the economy so that everyone can participate. And there's so many things that we have to address to do that, but those are some of them.
Thank you, Mr. Washburn.
Thank you very much. Poverty is a serious issue in the state of Arkansas, there's no question about it. And with the way the state dealt with COVID, and then the Biden inflation, where all of us feel the pain every time we go to the grocery store, every time we go to the gas pump, it's just been made worse. Now, you can't tax your way out of poverty. We're sitting on a $1.2 billion tax surplus in the state, which means they've been taxing the daylights out of us, and it's outrageous. We need to seriously cut taxes, as I was talking about in my opening statement. Arkansas maintains one of the most expensive bureaucracies in America, spending 34% more per capita than the national average and 63% more than surrounding states. When I say I want to slash the state bureaucracy, I'm serious. By the way, we're the only state in the country that has duplicate child welfare agencies. We've got DCFS and the Department of Human Services, we've got Crimes Against Children Division and Arkansas State Police. So we're saying the other 49 are wrong, and we got this right. And by the way, sometimes they take children away from parents who have done anything wrong, and then you're presumed guilty until you prove yourself innocent, and that's outrageous. My motto is do unto others as you have them do unto you. I don't know of any government that's ever done that before, but it's about time we start. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Russell, 90 seconds.
I feel the biggest economic issue facing everyone is, aside from some of the lack of opportunity in some of our rural areas, it would be having the money wasted by the people that normally sit in the offices that we're seeking. As was mentioned before, we have an overgrown bureaucracy, and it's not a matter of not needing those regulations, it's a matter of we have them in place, but they're being wasted. They're not doing the job they're supposed to do. They're not overseeing what they're supposed to be. We've accepted a doctrine of criminalizing poverty and making it to where if you are if you're upside down on finances, or if you find yourself in dire straits, we as a society have somehow gotten to the point where we've decided that that is a moral failing at the point, rather than matter of circumstance, medical condition, there's any number of underlying factors that play into it. But we have decided to accept this more expedient to make it your fault, and therefore your responsibility to get out of. And if you don't, then we're going to criminalize you and profit off of that through the criminal justice system and the prison system. That's one of the most pressing issues that people have, is that even when you're struggling to survive, you're having to fight against a system that is inherently working against you, and we have to address that.
Thank you. Ms. Mason.
I would say, as an immigrant who came here, my mother came here and couldn't find a position to work at a chicken plant, and had to save money to open the first Thai restaurant in Arkansas. And growing up at the restaurant, I know that small business need help, and that we need to allocate funds to support small business, because small business help the economy. In addition to that, we have to make sure poverty. During COVID and before COVID, we got kids that the only meal they get in school that's the only meal they would get is at school. So we need to make sure that single parents that need help to get food, that we don't have to go through all these red tape. By the time they get approved, they're already hungry and homeless. We have bureaucracy that have put so much policy and laws that want them to submit so many documentation that by the time they get to the family to get approved food, they're already out on the street. So we have a lot of issues with poverty. Poverty impact all of us. It doesn't matter what color, it's like cancer. So small business, we have to put small business and help the small business to grow and to allocate funds for that. And for our kids, the youth who are our future. Our state is ranked 48th poorest state in the United States of America. And the future leader of our state is our kids. Why are they going hungry? And the parents are not having jobs. So just create a job. We could be the quarter for solar panel, have manufactured here, so that way we could create jobs for the citizens of our state.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
So when you ask the question of what's the single most important economic issue, it reminds me of my childhood. And when I think about growing up in Pine Bluff, which was vibrant at the time I was growing up. Main Street had tons of businesses. My mom owned a store called Bev's Bags and Accessories. I'm reminded of Hughes, Arkansas, where I spent time getting bit by mosquitoes, but enjoying the community there because there were vibrant businesses. And it leads me to understand that the single greatest issue that communities are left out, unseen, and disconnected from resources that are available. And so for me and for us, we see it as critical to spread PB&J across the state because communities are disconnected from PB&J. And to be really clear, PB&J is preschool, broadband, and jobs. So we're talking education across the state everywhere, with a particular emphasis on pre-K. Infrastructure development across the state, with a particular emphasis on broadband. Because if you're not connected to broadband, you're not connected to the broader world. And of course, jobs. I've traveled to all 75 counties in the state. And county after county, town after town, place after place, I hear the stories of industry that left and people that felt unseen and unheard. So to me, that's the single greatest issue, reconnecting our communities with the broader economy.
Thank you. Now, you've each got 30 seconds if there's anything you want to add or clarify, Mr. Mayor.
I understand the irony of a fat boy up here talking about ending the grocery tax. But this is a part of my campaign. We are trying to get a petition together to end the grocery tax so our Kansans can save more money and be able to use those income or those funds that they have to better support their families. And I want to reiterate this main point. Whatever we do in our government, the main thing is, are we using force to get people to do what we would consider as a preference? Are we, excuse me.
Thank you. Only 30 seconds here, Mr. Martin.
Well, I think the need for economic development, obviously, as we look in our rural communities throughout the state, and we do have to have them connected. We also have the state of Arkansas creating unfunded mandates. We were visiting with the county judge who they fund a 911 center, but then they don't fund the administration. So we have to make sure that the state government is a good partner with cities and county governments and school districts, and that's part of the economy in doing that. We also have to look at the criminal justice system. We have to be smarter on nonviolent crime than we're being right now, and provide the jobs where we can instead of jail.
Thank you. Mr. Washburn, 30 seconds.
Yes, sir. We do need to get rid of the grocery tax, no question about it. We do need to cut the gas tax because, again, people are feeling the pain from buying inflation when they go to buy groceries and when they're going to get gas. Talk about economic development, it'd be nice to have somebody in charge of the council of economic development who's actually going to make a payroll. And I just want to notice there's one very big name that's not here today. People often ask me, are you going to challenge Sarah to debate? I said, I'd be happy to debate her, but there are too many questions she can answer. And those are the questions we're dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Russell?
Well, actually, I was going to say something else, touching on what Ricky meant. The use of force. And again, talking about criminal justice reform and everything else, it is a matter of looking at what we're doing legally. Are we using force as actual brute force, or are we using the law as coercive force, where here is a better path to follow? And that's usually what you want to do within a society, is you want to give benefit to where if this is beneficial to the society, this is where you're going to gain most benefit. You encourage that behavior. That's a basic in mental health, it's a basic in human activity.
Still pretty much on economic issues, 30 seconds, Ms. Benz.
Well, our state, you have a lot of people, citizens here that are unemployed. We need to bring manufacturing here. And the natural state, we can have and partner with different manufacturers. 70% solar. We have to go with alternative energy. 70% is we buy solar from China. We can have a manufacturer here in Arkansas that makes sense to where we can have the citizen have a living wage. They don't have to suffer. And right now, you got a lot of families that can't pay for their bills, nor even buy food. So we need to focus on economic development and bringing manufacturing here and have a job for our citizens.
Thank you. 30 seconds, Mr. Jones. This will wrap us up on question 1.
Sure. When I think about the question, as I mentioned, this disconnect in and the feeling of being left out and unseen, the key to unlock that is spreading PB&J to all communities, preschool broadband and jobs. But there's an undercurrent that we also have to address. One, and I believe our leadership, leaders who don't think they have to show up or listen or engage or care. And then there's an undercurrent of stigmatization and dehumanization. We stigmatize poverty, we stigmatize mental health, we stigmatize the criminal justice system, and these are things that we have to solve.
Thank you. Let's move on to question 2. Mr. Martin, we're going to start with you this time, and then we'll move down. What, if anything, would you have done differently from Governor Asa Hutchinson during the COVID pandemic of the past 2 years?
I was in a meeting last week where I stood in praise of Governor Hutchinson and the way he handled the COVID crisis. It was a crisis that our state had not faced before, and I thought that he handled it, his administration handled it extremely well. I think that allowing private businesses and churches, places of worship to determine what they were going to do and how they were going to treat the pandemic and what they were going to require really was getting the government out of the way. I think one of the most unfortunate things in my lifetime was the politicization of a public health epidemic. And I fault Democrats and Republicans for that. We should be able to come together to solve public health issues without dividing the way we did over COVID-19. If I were governor, I think I would have handled it very similarly. I do think maybe I would have brought together more community leaders and go out into the rural areas and with our farm families and see how it's affecting away from some of the larger population portions of the state, and try to build more of a framework and teamwork throughout the state to address it, and make sure that our rural constituents and our farm families and everyone really felt like they had a place at the table in trying to address how their community should address it. So I think if there's anything differently, I may have worked a little bit harder on bringing all the communities together.
Thank you. Mr. Washburn, you have a minute and a half.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Governor Hutchinson did a terrible job dealing with COVID-19. I think telling small businesses, hey, we're going to send around investigators from the health department, small mom and pop cafes and diners. We're not going to touch Walmart, Sam's Club, or Target, or Lowe's, or Home Depot, or Kroger, but we're going to go after you guys. Senator Dan Sullivan tried to get a bill passed to get these people back their money. Of course, Asa stopped that. He did a COVID-19 town hall in Silent Springs last summer, and people were yelling at him, complaining that their loved ones were in a hospital and not being given any therapeutics. And Asa was shocked. He said, well, of course they've been given therapeutics. Isn't that right? Turned to the hospital administrator standing there and said, not presently. Asa was like, what was that? Nothing changed. I think having UAMS plant a fake news story with local TV news operations a few months back, saying, ivermectin, that's horse place. Get call 911 OD on an ivermectin poison control center. Ignoring the fact that 7 or 8 years ago, the people who developed ivermectin won a Nobel Prize for medicine for its wonderful treatment for human beings. There's been, a lot of disinformation going on, and I think it's a crying shame. Telling bars and restaurants, you got to close out at 10, because apparently the China virus is nocturnal. It's really dangerous around 11 p.m. or midnight. It's outrageous. There have been a lot of things done wrong, and I just scratched the surface, but I'm trying to be respectful of time.
Thank you. Mr. Russell?
I agree there were several missteps, and we just disagree on which ones they were. Primarily, the biggest mistake that I saw was the moving forward of banning mask mandates in smaller areas. You're literally politicizing it by making this grandiose statement that in effect is saying we're stripping the ability of local communities to protect themselves as needed or to make the decision for themselves. The party of big government wants to strip the ability of the individual societies away. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't follow. That doesn't track in any way. And then between the state and the federal level, the state not giving any guidelines to employers, anything like that, on how to mitigate, how to do this. The primary job of the state is to protect the citizens. That's the fundamental role of it. And instead, you're advocating a responsibility and saying, oh, well, we're going to be hands off. It's completely on you as employers. And then, up at the federal level, you're McConnell going, you can't sue employers for anything, leaving, again, the people on their own. So there were a lot of systemic failures in how they addressed it that came down to simple political maneuverings on it, that fundamentally overlooked their first and foremost responsibility to the people. That was it.
Thank you. Ms. Nace, a minute and a half.
I would say, no one ever experienced this covert. This is different, this is new. I'm not gonna say that Governor Asa did his best. What I would do differently as your governor, I would make sure that we give information out consistently of what's the cause and effect. If you take the vaccine, what is the preventive measure? You have family might have existing condition that if they don't take the vaccine, if they get the covert, it could devastate to death for their loved ones that have pre-existing condition. So I feel that, I don't want to blame and say, well, he didn't do right or whatever, because we never experienced this before. This is like a scary movie. So we have to talk to the people. And we have to deal differently. We can't just be a dictator and say, everyone wear masks, or I would want the citizen input and the business owner, because as a small business, it did impact them. I mean, some business closed because of this. So I would acknowledge that Governor Asa Hutchinson did his best. And what I would do differently, as I expressed to you earlier, is to make sure that we communicate to this public how we can help each other, and we all can be safe. We have to do this together.
Mr. Jones?
So COVID certainly and literally flipped our world upside down. We were experiencing things that we had never experienced before. I was running the Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub at the time. On March 13th, our entire staff went home, and we went virtual, and we had to figure out how to flip all of our classes virtual and get PPE across the state, because that's what we were doing. It's a challenge, and I will say that when I think about how we could have done better, certainly leaders have to engage communities at the local level in an authentic way and listen, and when you do that, you'll actually find that the solutions bubble up. And you'll find where the challenges are. When Governor Hutchinson did go out and start to listen to communities, he found that one of the reasons people were not actually getting the vaccine is because they weren't getting the information about the vaccine because it was all online and they didn't have broadband. And I reflect back on what Arkansas did a few decades ago when we were leaders. Now, a few decades ago during the pandemic, Arkansas, the government came together with the private sector, small and large businesses, and with the nonprofit sector, and we were the leading state for vaccine uptake because folks worked together as one Arkansas, and we can do it again.
Mr. Harrington, minute and a half.
I said this during my run for the U.S. Senate, that we politicize this virus too much. I mean, really, we all should feel shame for getting caught up in that, all of us. We need to be grounded, clear-minded, and level-headed, especially when it comes to these highly contagious diseases. In pandemics, we just got to get down to business. Leave the politics out of it, especially when it comes to people's survival. What I would have done differently, if I heard something from the CDC that was coming around and the people need to know about it, I'm going to tell the people. We need to come up with ways to prepare for these things because they're going to happen again. We live in a highly connected world. You can be somewhere in the world in just about a day and a half. So these things are going to happen, and we need to prepare ourselves. We need to come up with a plan and inform the people. I honestly think that basic nursing skills should be common knowledge for the people and things like that. So as governor, I'm going to work with the people. Public health issues, we want them to be well informed. We want to have a plan for any kind of pandemic that might happen.
Okay, we're going to give each of you now 30 seconds. We're still on the COVID issue. 30 seconds, anything you want to add or clarify. Mr. Martin, we'll start with you. 30 seconds.
Certainly, I'm very careful not to be an armchair quarterback. I think was part of my response. So I also try to watch my tone when talking about what folks did. We saw some states that shut down completely, and I thought that was the wrong approach. We saw other states that took very little action. So when I talked about Governor Hutchinson's approach, I thought it was a balanced approach. Certainly, there were things that could be done differently. As we sit here now, with the benefit of hindsight, I have to the Monday night football's over, it's Tuesday, so we can all talk, but that's kind of my position.
Mr. Washburn, 30 seconds.
Thank you. Masks don't work. The COVID virus is so much smaller than the space between the threads. It's like shooting BB through a tennis net. Masks don't work. It's been 1 week since the Arkansas Supreme Court ruled that the Bentonville School District, or any school district, can mandate masks for children, and the parents have nothing to say about it. They ruled 4-1 with 2 abstentions. It's an outrage. And my opponent for the Republican nomination, 1 week later, Sarah Huckabee Sanders hasn't said, oh, that was a good ruling, oh, that was a bad ruling. Nothing. Total silence. Silence, Sarah. Thank you.
Mr. Russell?
As the owner of a small business in healthcare, when COVID hit, that March 1st, myself and my office staff, which consisted of 1 person at the time, moved the entirety of practice from in-person to telehealth option over the course of the weekend. If one of the clinicians didn't have what they needed, we made sure they had what they did. Make sure you've got a solid internet connection, a private area to use, and a laptop to use. Make sure that all the patients knew how to reach out, how to use technology, how to get taken care of. If they needed another place, we set aside space in the office. That's the kind of proactive we need.
It's nice, 30 seconds.
I would say we could do better by communication with the information, so that way the citizen would be aware of the status of the COVID and how it could impact you. From the getting the shot to wearing the mask, but not to actually mandate that everyone wear a mask, but information about the disease and how it could take your life and your family if you don't get the shot, or if you have family members that have pre-existing condition. I myself, for one, I didn't want to take the shot, but I know that I had a family member that had a pre-existing condition, so I did it because I love them and the people around me.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, 30 seconds.
Yeah, my wife is an ER doc at Air Force veteran, and she's trained in disaster preparedness. My PhD is in urban planning, and when I look at the question of when is the best time to prepare for a disaster, to address a disaster, the best time to address a disaster is before it happens. And there are things that we can't be doing now. There will be other disasters. We should learn from what worked and what didn't work. An example, supply chain. There's supply chain fixes that we can make now to prepare ourselves for whatever disaster comes. And as governor, I will certainly put a focus on preparation.
All right, Mr. Harrington, you got 30 seconds. We'll wrap this one up.
I definitely would not have closed down businesses. To answer the question, what I would have done differently compared to our current government. We definitely want to try to empower the people and the government be the guiding hand through these difficult times.
All right, we are going to move on to our third question, and it's yet another of those, what, if anything, would you have done different? What would you have done differently than Governor Hutchinson during the Black Lives Matter protests following the killing of George Floyd? Some of the biggest ones were 2 blocks away from where we sit right now. Arkansas Pharmacists Association was burned. There were state police special tactics teams. So during that period of unrest, if you had been governor, what would you have done differently? Mr. Washburn, we'll start with you, and you have a minute and a half.
Appreciate it, thank you. I think it was 2 or 3 days into it that he said, okay, we're going to put the Arkansas State Police over the LRPD, because clearly the LRPD wasn't getting the job done, and you just had a few Arkansas Capitol Police who were, trying to keep order, and they weren't capable of doing that. So I was told by members of the legislature that they talked the governor into, okay, look, you got to put the state police in charge because the LRPD is falling down the job. That should have been done more quickly. Also, on that Saturday evening when I-630 was shut down and Mayor Frank Scott Jr. and the police chief said the next morning that people have a First Amendment right to shut down an interstate. The next day, the governor and the head of the state police mentioned, oh, by the way, it's against the law to shut down the interstate. I probably would have been as diplomatic as the governor and the head of the state police were. I probably would have referred to exactly who they were talking about.
But sometimes discretion is better part of valor. So I would have done it differently. I'm just not saying in that instance my decision would have been better. I'd probably been like, hey, you're with the mayor and the police chief said, can I say more? No, it's not your first amendment right. No, that's against the law. Anyway, that's about all I got.
Thank you. Mr. Russell, minute and a half.
First and foremost, I would have worked with law enforcement agencies to ensure that you're not going in an antagonistic position. There is absolutely a way to deploy law enforcement in a situation like that protects lives, protects property, but doesn't actually assault or impede on anyone's rights. When you have protesters out there and form up a military phalanx and advance on them using chemical irritants, you're engaging in things that are illegal in the theater of war, and you're doing it to your own citizens. That's a problem. They're out there exercising their First Amendment right. Now, do they have bad actors in there? Yes, absolutely. Do you need to work with the crowd to actually remove them? Yes, absolutely. But you can do that by lining the streets with officers and forces and barricades to ensure that the buildings are protected. Make sure that it's actually encompassed so that it's protected. Referring to the shutting down the freeway, we were right there next to it. We supported that. And believe it or not, it was a First Amendment issue. And we were down there documenting it because it was historic. It was a thing. But it was done in a peaceful manner. It was done without jeopardizing anyone's health and safety or well-being. It was making someone's voice heard, which is their basic right.
Thank you. Ms. Lennox, minute and a half.
I would agree because everyone has freedom of speech and they have the right to protest, but peaceful protests. But of course you have to work with the citizen and understand how are they feeling and why are they marching. And we have to work with the leadership in the community and not to hurt or harm them because we work for the people. So I myself have a son who is half African American and I fear for him. He's 12 and he's like 5'11". So as a mother, that's very scary. But also I want him to understand that, this is America and you have the freedom to march. If you feel like your rights been violated and you want your voice to be heard, we work with the police force and the leadership in the community to allow the peaceful process and they're marching and letting their voice be heard. So I agree with Russ. We don't have to harm our citizen. It's just going to be heard. And as your governor, you have to work with everybody. And especially who's your boss, which is the citizen of the state.
Mr. Jones, 1.5 minutes.
The death of anyone is painful and tragic because it's not only the individual, but it's their families, it's their communities that are at a loss. And when I think about the murder of George Floyd, it actually, in the moments we were in the country, in our state, people in cities, I'm reminded of the murder and the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I look back at what then Governor Winthrop Rockefeller did. He came out and was the only Southern governor to bring people together across communities, the Black community, the white community, churches, nonprofits, businesses, and they stood together at the Capitol. And you notice what happened after that? Arkansas did not see some of the upheaval that we saw across the country. And I think in these moments, in these times, we need leadership. We need compassionate leaders. We need empathetic leaders. We need leaders who are willing to listen. And we need leaders who are willing to lean in and bring us all together.
Thank you. Mr. Harrington?
It's been almost 2 years since we've had Black Lives Matter protests, and we still do not have any sort of legislation passed to end qualified immunity at the federal level, or any type of legislation here at the state level that protects people's constitutional rights, especially with regards to police brutality. And what I would have done at that time, I would have tried to get out, work with the people, talk with the people, be amongst the chaos in essence, showing leadership right there, working with the legislature to pass it, because we cannot keep going up against these things and there's no change. It's almost like those who are elected understand human beings that our mind will shift to something else after we protest it. But we have to continue on until we get things changed. And I understand some people talk about the vehicles being burned. I hate that we have people out there that want to create chaos when people are trying to express themselves, that we have something that has happened to us, it has hurt us, and we want some justice. It's unfortunate we have people that detract from that, and that completely moves us away from that conversation and move it in a positive way. So it's deeply unfortunate that people use that time to burn down the building. And sometimes it might be someone that does that on purpose to detract from that conversation.
Thank you. Mr. Martin?
As a law student, I went to work for one of our African-American judges, Marion Humphrey, and he had a staff of everyone was African-American but me, and I was, so I got to be a minority for the first time. And I also was a pre-sentence officer. I had to suggest what the sentence of folks was. And over again, we had a number disproportionately of young African-American men coming through the court system, nonviolent offenses, drug offenses, single household, and mothers and no high school diploma. And I really felt called by God to see if I could intervene and to help even one child not need a pre-sentence report. And that's what led me to the Amelia B. Ice housing projects in Little Rock, where I began ministry, and that's where I still lead the church. The racial divide in our country is significant and ugly, and I've tried to dedicate my life to ending that divide. The death of George Floyd, I think, aroused in the minds of everyone the difficulties and the divisions that are still there. You all obviously have to abide by the rule of law. So as governor, we have to abide by the rule of law. We want people to protest, but they can't violate the law in doing it. We see lots of people violating the law in their protests. We've seen that a lot in the last 2 years from a lot of different groups. And whoever does it, it's wrong. We're bound by the rule of law, and as governor, what I would do is to make sure first that we are building those bridges, and so that people can know that we're leading through love. But then, if they're going to violate the law, we have to lead by force.
Thank you. Again, we're going to do 30 seconds for any additions, clarifications you want to make on this issue. Mr. Washburn?
Thank you. I find it remarkable that anyone on this panel would have endorsed the idea of hundreds of people blocking an interstate highway in the vicinity of a major children's hospital, which may have needed an ambulance to get through on a Saturday evening, regardless of whether it's legal or not. Somebody running for governor endorsing breaking the law, which definitely could have led to a death. It's just remarkable to me.
Mr. Russell, 30 seconds.
Okay. Having been there, I saw the crowd parked to let an ambulance through, so it was a non-issue. Aside from that, there is another principle, and this is going back to my philosophical studies in ethics and legal theory. It's called civil disobedience theory, and it stands on the fact that an unjust law is no law at all. The entire civil rights movement is predicated on that. There are laws that need to be challenged from time to time to see where we are as a society. And that's how we grow, and that's how we evolve as a society and come together and understand one another better.
Ms. Mason?
I mean, I agree with Doc that, when you protest, you want to make sure that you're not hindering and hurting, especially at the children's hospital. But you want to make sure that you support the process and to let the citizens of the state be heard. And we have to work with the citizen and not work against them. And hopefully no one get hurt, but we want to support the freedom of expression.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
As an ordained minister and an engineer, the thing that I'm taught to do is to dig underneath the surface and to get at the root cause of issues. And one of the things that I don't think we do a good job at in government and in the private sector and in the nonprofit sector is really take the time to find out what's at the heart. And the more we do that, the better we will be positioned to solve issues and challenges. And I will say this, anyone who wants to serve as governor should also be able to talk about answers to these questions.
Mr. Harrington, 30 seconds.
I just want to say one thing. I am a libertarian running for governor. Libertarians adhere to the non-aggression principle. That means that we refuse to initiate force for political, social, and economic goals.
And Mr. Martin, 30 seconds, and we'll wrap up this one.
I was on Interstate 630 when that protest happened. I was just driving. I'd come home from vacation. It was a scary event, and the people doing it violate the law, and you can't have the law violated. Protests have to be legal, and if they're not, then you have to take all means necessary to stop them. And so that was, otherwise, citizens take the law into their own hands, which I saw several people whose cars were blocked who pretended to do that. This is a very scary event.
All right, let's move on to our next question. There has been a lot of discussion in recent months, it seems, about reducing our state income tax. First off, do you favor a further reduction in the state income tax? If so, how much? If not, why not? And try to be specific. If you've got a plan, give us dollar amounts. If phased in, give us a timeline. So let's talk about the Arkansas state income tax. Mr. Russell, we'll begin with you this time, and we have a minute and a half each.
Okay. No, I am not in favor of eliminating the tax. I am in favor of us actually getting what we're supposed to be paying for. Again, what we talked about earlier. I've run into very few people who actually mind paying taxes because we understand that as a society this is mutually beneficial. These are things that we're supposed to be getting together. But when that money is actually going to waste, when it is being squandered, that's when people get bent out of shape. Because then, what are you doing with the money that I gave you? That's when people feel like they've been ripped off and disenfranchised once again. That's where you start getting the problems. That's where the accountability comes into. Now, we can, and I heard earlier some of the other things, addressing on the sales tax. Ricky mentioned before, eliminating that. That would be excellent, because then the people who are in the worst poverty levels are going to be the most benefited. Because when you're dealing with daily survival, you're dealing with food, you're dealing with groceries, that's something that everybody has the same expenses every day. Because everybody's got to eat, everybody's got to have these things. So it takes up a more significant portion of your income at that point. If your income is smaller, that represents a bigger chunk of it. If you have a large income, then it becomes negligible. That would benefit the most impacted people in our state by doing that. And then the same people who benefit from the services that the taxes are supposed to be providing for to help them get out of those situations in the first place. So I am not in favor of eliminating, I'm in favor of getting more for our money.
All right, Ms. Bates, minute and a half on the income tax.
I'm not in favor of cutting the income tax because you have a lot of programs. Plus, remember, Arkansas is the 44th state in the United States of America. And if you cut the income tax, the tax that goes towards summer programs. And my son, as a young single mom, had relied, I can afford childcare. So you take and get rid of the taxes. You got a lot of people that rely on different programs, from Head Start to Meals on Wheels, and you got citizens that are in dire need, and the taxes we contribute help those family and individuals that are needing help. So I'm not in favor of that because there's consequences with that. And people have to understand that, oh yes, get rid of income tax, bring more home. No, you're hurting your own family. It could be your family member that's relying on that program through the tax, shared tax that we all put in to contribute to help our citizens.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, minute and a half.
I support the idea of cutting taxes, but you have to make the math work. And as a mathematician, I realize you have to make the math work. Arkansas's Constitution requires us to have a balanced budget. We have an enormous amount of federal dollars that would have to be allocated to address issues now. At some point, that's going to go away, and the math has to work. So the question that I think we should be asking is, if we do that, what are you going to cut? Do you cut police? Do you cut schools, and we're already 48? Do you cut healthcare in rural areas? When you go to Diamond City, we're about 5, maybe 3 to 5 years away from their sewer and water system collapsing, and it will run off into the Arkansas River. The levees right outside of Clay County, they're backing up, and it's impacting farmers. So the question that we have to ask is, what are you going to cut to make the math work if you do that? Now, I do think there are ways to ease the pain, particularly in this moment of inflation. Now, to ease the pain on the consumer and to ease the pain across the board. That comes through cutting grocery tax. That comes through cutting sales tax. But you have to make the math work.
Thank you. Mr. Harrington.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't this country start over an issue of taxes? I know most of us hate dealing with taxes, and philosophically, I'm in favor of repealing the state income tax. But again, if we do that, we have to have a clear plan on how we execute repealing that state tax. I also know that taxes support a lot of programs for people that are in need, people that cannot support themselves, people that are just struggling to make it. And I would not be in favor of snatching the rug out from under their feet. But the real issue that I see is the tax and spend that our government does. If you're going to levy taxes on the people, you better be spending that money right. And that's the only thing I could ask from the government. And that's the only thing that I would try to do as government, to make sure that the money that we are spending is going to the right place, and we're not paying $5,000 for a toilet or anything like that. That we be responsible with other people's money, because we all know nothing spends as sweet as other people's money.
All right, Mr. Martin, you have a minute and a half.
Thank you. Philosophically, I'm not opposed to tax cuts. Part of our economic plan and with our diamond plan is some targeted tax relief for small businesses and family farms post-COVID. So I think that is important, to put money back in people's hands so they can spur on the economy. I'm also a small business owner. It's a law firm, but for 25 years I've had to make payroll, had to pay taxes, and make ends meet, and I understand the burden of having to pay taxes as a small business. At the same time, we do have a balanced budget amendment. When I was in the state legislature, what we tried to work on was making sure the state government ran efficiently. One of the things I was most proud of in my legislative tenure was we copied the Texas Sunset Commission, which put sunset dates on every division of state government. And the only way they would be renewed would be if they ran efficiently. They spent their money correctly. They were very receptive to the people. We, the people, are the government. And so that we could get our hands around the way money is spent in state government. At the same time, if you look at removing all of the money with the state income tax, right now our two biggest sources of money into the state is the income tax and sales tax. And the two biggest expenses is the Medicaid DHS, and we get a 3-to-1 federal match on that. So for every dollar we spend, Washington spends $3. I'm not running for a federal office. There's probably difficulties and issues there, but Arkansas is the beneficiary of that. So where are you going to cut? What are you going to cut is exactly right. We have to be responsible when we talk about tax cuts more than just being rhetoric.
Thank you. Mr. Washburn, you have a minute and a half.
Thank you, I appreciate it. The same old story, whether you put a Republican or a Democrat in the governor's mansion or in charge of the legislature, we keep on being told, well, we can cut this little tax here, we've got to raise those over there. We can't cut taxes across the board. That's what they keep on telling us. Well, we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. Kaiser Family Foundation, fiscal year 2020, per capita state spending, the states around here, Missouri, 4,400, Texas, 4,700, Tennessee, 5,200, Oklahoma, 6,300. Louisiana, 6,700. Mississippi, 6,700. Arkansas, 9,200. Oh, but we can't cut it. We can't get rid of it. Look, we got to get rid of it. We got to get rid of the state income tax, and I'll sign a bill doing that right away. How do we do it? Across the board, 10% cut in every department budget. Make each department sharpen their pencils, find the easiest 10% to cut up front. Immediate hiring freeze statewide until an audit is conducted. And conduct an independent audit, not run by the bureaucrats in the state government, of every state agency, looking for fraud, duplication of resources, waste, and hoard. Roby, who was here earlier, he had a story some years back, finding all kinds of fraud in the situation of state-owned vehicles. It was kind of a cause célèbre at the time. There's a lot we can do to bring things down, bring tax down in this state, and to boost our economy and deal with poverty. Again, you can't tax your way out of poverty.
All right, we're going to again give you each 30 seconds. Anything you're just dying to say about your tax plan, Mr. Russell, we'll start with you again.
I thank Ricky for dodging the last minute, because you're right. We were founded on a little scuffle over taxation. It was taxation without representation, so yeah, we're good. Honestly, the big one for me is, again, having been a small business owner and everything else, we've heard about forever, my entire life, I've heard people asking me money on politics. And we keep sending the same money elite into office that are completely detached from the day-to-day realities of life. That's where this has to start.
Thank you. Ms. Madison?
Look, I'm not a politician, okay? I'm a politician. And I know that taxes, that we have a fair share of taxes, and we can't just completely get rid of it. You know, as a business owner, and also, I run $100 million operations. You got to take a look at what areas that's needing help. I mean, you could take a look at it to see before you decide to just cut taxes completely. It's business, running the government's like business. You have to make sure it balances out, like Chris said. So that's my say on the taxes.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, 30 seconds.
Again, the math has to add up. Families thrive when they have access to good quality education, great infrastructure, and they have access to opportunities, and they're in safe communities. So when we talk about completely gutting the government, which is us, we are the government, then you're talking about defunding police, you're talking about cutting education, you're talking about services that get left out that are needed in order for us to really thrive. And I want to be a governor who attracts business. And you attract business by having good quality of life.
Thank you. Mr. Harrington, 30 seconds.
The first thing is, if we cut taxes, is there another opportunity for private organizations to fill those certain roles if taxes should be cut? Second thing I'd like to mention is that if we did cut taxes, before we even got to that point where it was before the legislature, we would need to see if our departments and cabinet departments are able to start working down and cutting their budget themselves.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, 30 seconds.
11,000 people were removed from the Medicaid rolls in Arkansas, not because our growing economy lifted them from poverty, but simply because there were new forms to fill out. The state has recognized that as a problem and put them back on, so I'm pleased with that. This is what we're talking about, though, when we talk about cutting taxes over the vulnerable families who are receiving that money now. Most of the budget goes to Medicaid. We also need to freeze unfunded mandates immediately that the state puts on cities and counties and school districts. We should buy unfunded mandates on these local municipalities and counties.
All right. And Mr. Washburn, 30 seconds.
I love finding areas of agreements with people up here. Sending the same money to elite into office. You know, my opponent, I only have one opponent for the Republican nomination, Sarah Sanders, is part of that same money elite. If you give her the nomination and the governor's mansion, she will continue the status quo for Asa Hutchinson. We have 40 years, half of it Republican governors, half of it Democrat governors, and the rich get richer and the poor stay poor. I'd like to kind of change that. By the way, it's an open primary state. You don't have to be a Republican to vote for Republican primary.
Thank you. All right, our final question, and we'll begin with you, Ms. Bates, this time. You'll each again have a minute and a half. If you're elected governor of Arkansas, you're sitting here at an Arkansas Press Association event, so how are you going to promote transparency in government, and how will you make yourself and members of your administration available to the media to ensure accountability in government? Ms. Madison?
Well, as your governor, I believe that transparency is the key to build trust with the shareholder, the citizen of the state. From the taxes that we take from the citizen, that we will let the citizen know what is being utilized or used for, line item. Because I feel for us to build a better Arkansas, we have to make sure that we communicate with our citizens and to let them know how the money is spent, the tax that we're taking from them. And that's the key to government, is to be honest. You might not like what we have to say or share, but you will respect it because you know that we're telling you and sharing with you the money's being spent to make the state better, to make your life and your family better.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, minute and a half. Transparency and accountability.
Yeah, well, productivity moves at the speed of trust. And you don't have trust if you don't have transparency and accountability. And I also believe that you practice like you play. So we are in a job interview now, and if you're in a job interview, then you need to show up and answer questions for those job interviews. And Sarah Sanders is not showing up and answering questions. As an ordained minister and an engineer, the thing that I'm taught to do is to dig underneath the surface and to get at the root cause of issues. And one of the things that I don't think we do a good job at in government and in the private sector and in the nonprofit sector is really take the time to find out what's at the heart. And the more we do that, the better we will be positioned to solve issues and challenges. And I will say this, anyone who wants to serve as governor should also be able to talk about answers to these questions.
Mr. Harrington, 30 seconds.
I just want to say one thing. I am a libertarian running for governor. Libertarians adhere to the non-aggression principle. That means that we refuse to initiate force for political, social, and economic goals.
And Mr. Martin, 30 seconds, and we'll wrap up this one.
I was on Interstate 630 when that protest happened. I was just driving. I'd come home from vacation. It was a scary event, and the people doing it violated the law, and you can't have the law violated. Protests have to be legal, and if they're not, then you have to take all means necessary to stop them. And so that was, otherwise, citizens take the law into their own hands, which I saw several people whose cars were blocked who pretended to do that. It's just a very scary event.
All right, let's move on to our next question. There has been a lot of discussion in recent months, it seems, about reducing our state income tax. First off, do you favor a further reduction in the state income tax? If so, how much? If not, why not? And try to be specific. If you've got a plan, give us dollar amounts. If phased in, give us a timeline. So let's talk about the Arkansas state income tax. Mr. Russell, we'll begin with you this time, and we have a minute and a half each.
Okay. No, I am not in favor of eliminating the tax. I am in favor of us actually getting what we're supposed to be paying for. Again, what we talked about earlier. I've run into very few people who actually mind paying taxes because we understand that as a society this is mutually beneficial. These are things that we're supposed to be getting together. But when that money is actually going to waste, when it's being squandered, that's when people get bent out of shape. Because then, what are you doing with the money that I gave you? That's when people feel like they've been ripped off and disenfranchised once again. That's where you start getting the problems. That's where the accountability comes into. Now, we can, and I heard earlier some of the other things, addressing on the sales tax. Ricky's mentioned before, eliminating that. That would be excellent, because then the people who are in the worst poverty levels are going to be the most benefited. Because when you're dealing with daily survival, when you're dealing with food, you're dealing with groceries, that's something that everybody has the same expenses every day. Because everybody's got to eat, everybody's got to have these things. So it takes up a more significant portion of your income at that point. If your income is smaller, that represents a bigger chunk of it. If you have a large income, then it becomes negligible. That would benefit the most impacted people in our state by doing that. And then the same people who benefit from the services that the taxes are supposed to be providing for to help them get out of those situations in the first place. So I am not in favor of eliminating, I'm in favor of getting more for our money.
All right, Ms. Bates, minute and a half on the income tax.
I'm not in favor of cutting this income tax because you have a lot of programs. Plus, remember, Arkansas is the 44th state in the United States of America. And if you cut the income tax, the tax that goes for the summer programs. And myself as a young single mom have relied, I can afford childcare. So you take and get rid of the taxes. You got a lot of people that rely on different programs, from Head Start to Meals on Wheels, and you got citizens that are in their need, and the taxes we contribute help those family individuals that are needing help. So I'm not in favor of that because there's consequences with that. And people have to understand that, oh yes, get rid of income tax, bring more home. No, you're hurting your own family. It could be your family member that's relying on that program. Through the tax, share tax that we all put in to contribute to help our citizens.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, minute and a half.
I support the idea of cutting taxes, but you have to make the math work. And as a mathematician, I realized you have to make the math work. Arkansas's Constitution requires us to have a balanced budget. We have an enormous amount of federal dollars that have to be allocated to address issues now. At some point, that's going to go away, and the math has to work. So the question that I think we should be asking is, if we do that, what are you going to cut? Do you cut police? Do you cut schools, and we're already 48th? Do you cut healthcare in rural areas? When you go to Diamond City, we're about maybe 3 to 5 years away from their sewer and water system collapsing, and it will run off into the Arkansas River. The levees right outside of Clay County, they're backing up, and it's impacting farmers. So the question that we have to ask is, what are you going to cut to make the math work if you do that? Now, I do think there are ways to ease the pain, particularly in this moment of inflation, to ease the pain on the consumer and to ease the pain across the board. That comes through cutting grocery tax. That comes through cutting sales tax. But you have to make the math work.
Thank you. Mr. Harrington?
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't this country start over an issue of taxes? I know most of us hate dealing with taxes, and philosophically, I'm in favor of repealing the state income tax. But again, if we do that, we have to have a clear plan on how we execute repealing the state tax. I also know that taxes support a lot of programs for people that are in need, people that cannot support themselves, people that are just struggling to make it. And I would not be in favor of snatching the rug out from under their feet. But the real issue that I see is the tax and spend that our government does. If you're going to levy taxes on the people, you better be spending that money right. And that's the only thing I could ask from the government. And that's the only thing that I would try to do as government, to make sure that the money that we are spending is going to the right place, that we're not paying $5,000 for a toilet or anything like that. That we be responsible with other people's money, because we all know nothing spends as sweet as other people's money.
All right, Mr. Martin, you have a minute and a half.
Thank you. Philosophically, I'm not opposed to tax cuts. Part of our economic plan and with our Diamond plan is some targeted tax relief for small businesses and family farms post-COVID. So I think that is important, to put money back in people's hands so they can spur on the economy. I'm also a small business owner. It's a law firm, but for 25 years I've had to make payroll, had to pay taxes, and make ends meet, and I understand the burden of having to pay taxes as a small business. At the same time, we do have a balanced budget amendment. When I was in the state legislature, what we tried to work on was making sure that state government ran efficiently. One of the things I was most proud of in my legislative tenure was we copied the Texas Sunset Commission, which put sunset dates on every division of state government. And the only way they would be renewed would be if they ran efficiently. They spent their money correctly. They were very receptive to the people. We, the people, are the government. And so that we could get our hands around the way money is spent in state government. At the same time, if you look at removing all of the money with the state income tax, right now our two biggest sources of money into the state is the income tax and sales tax. And the two biggest expenses is the Medicaid DHS, and we get a 3-to-1 federal match on that. So for every dollar we spend, Washington spends $3. I'm not running for a federal office. There's probably difficulties and issues there, but Arkansas is the beneficiary of that. So where are you going to cut? What are you going to cut is exactly right. We have to be responsible when we talk about tax cuts more than just being rhetoric.
Thank you. Mr. Washburn, you have a minute and a half.
Thank you, appreciate it. The same old story, whether you put a Republican or a Democrat in the governor's mansion or in charge of the legislature, we keep on being told, well, we can cut this little tax here, but we've got to raise those over there. We can't cut taxes across the board. That's what they keep on telling us. Well, we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. Kaiser Family Foundation, fiscal year 2020, per capita state spending, the states around here, Missouri, 4,400, Texas, 4,700, Tennessee, 5,200, Oklahoma, 6,300, Louisiana, 6,700, Mississippi, 6,700, Arkansas, 9,200. oh, but we can't cut it, we can't get rid of it. Look, we gotta get rid of it. We gotta get rid of the state income tax, and I'll sign a bill doing that right away. How do we do it? Across the board, 10% cut in every department budget. Make each department sharpen their pencils, find the easiest 10% to cut up front. Immediate hiring freeze statewide until an audit is conducted, and conduct an independent audit, not run by the bureaucrats of the state government, of every state agency, looking for fraud, duplication of resources, waste, and fraud. Roby, who was here earlier, he had a story some years back, finding all kinds of fraud in the situation of state-owned vehicles. It was kind of a cost to live at the time. There's a lot we can do to bring things down, bring tax down in this state, and to boost our economy and deal with poverty. Again, you can't tax your way out of poverty.
All right, we're going to again give you each 30 seconds. Anything you're just dying to say about your tax plan, Mr. Russell, we'll start with you again.
I thank Ricky for dodging the last minute, because you're right. We were founded on a little stuff all over taxation. It was taxation without representation, so yeah, we're good. Honestly, the big one for me is, again, having been a small business owner and everything else, we've heard about forever, my entire life, I've heard people asking me money on politics. And we keep sending the same money elite into office that are completely detached from the day-to-day realities of life. That's where this has to start.
Thank you. Ms. Nice?
Look, I am not a politician, okay? I'm a politician. And I know that taxes, that we have a fair share of taxes, and we can't just completely get rid of it. You know, as a business owner, and also, I run $100 million operations. You got to take a look at what areas that's needing help. I mean, you could take a look at it to see before you decide to just cut taxes completely. It's business. Running the government's like business. You have to make sure it balances out, like Chris said. So that's my say on the taxes.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, 30 seconds.
Again, the math has to add up. Families thrive when they have access to good quality education, great infrastructure, and they have access to opportunities, and they're in safe communities. So when we talk about completely gutting the government, which is us, we are the government, then you're talking about defunding police, you're talking about cutting education, you're talking about services that get left out that are needed in order for us to really thrive. And I want to be a governor who attracts business. And you attract business by having good quality of life.
Thank you. Mr. Harrington, 30 seconds.
The first thing is, if we cut taxes, is there another opportunity for private organizations to fill those certain roles if taxes should be cut? Second thing I'd like to mention is that if we did cut taxes, before we even got to that point where it was before the legislature, we would need to see if our departments and cabinet departments are able to start working down and cutting their budget themselves.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, 30 seconds.
11,000 people were removed from the Medicaid rolls in Arkansas, not because our growing economy lifted them from poverty, but simply because there were new forms to fill out. The state has recognized that as a problem and put them back on, so I'm pleased with that. This is what we're talking about, though, when we talk about cutting taxes over the vulnerable families who are receiving that money now. Most of the budget goes to Medicaid. We also need to freeze unfunded mandates immediately that the state puts on cities and counties and school districts. We should buy unfunded mandates on these local municipalities and counties.
All right. And Mr. Washburn, 30 seconds.
I love finding areas of agreements with people up here. Sending the same money to elite into office. You know, my opponent, I only have one opponent for the Republican nomination, Sarah Sanders, is part of that same money elite. If you give her the nomination and the governor's mansion, she will continue the status quo from Asa Hutchinson. We have 40 years, half of it Republican governors, half of it Democrat governors, and the rich get richer and the poor stay poor. I'd like to kind of change that. By the way, it's an open primary state. You don't have to be a Republican to vote Republican primary.
Thank you. All right, our final question, and we'll begin with you, Ms. Bates, this time. You'll each again have a minute and a half. If you're elected governor of Arkansas, you're sitting here at an Arkansas Press Association event, so how are you going to promote transparency in government? And how will you make yourself and members of your administration available to the media to ensure accountability in government? Ms. Mays?
Well, as your governor, I believe that transparency is the key to build trust with our shareholders, the citizens of the state. From the taxes that we take from the citizen, that we will let the citizen know what is being utilized or used for, line item. Because I feel for us to build a better Arkansas, we have to make sure that we communicate with our citizens and to let them know how the money is spent, the tax that we're taking from them. And that's the key to government, is to be honest. You might not like what we have to say or share, but you will respect it because you know that we're telling you and sharing with you the money's being spent to make the state better, to make your life and your family better.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, minute and a half, transparency and accountability.
Yeah, well, productivity moves at the speed of trust. And you don't have trust if you don't have transparency and accountability. And I also believe that you practice like you play. So we are in a job interview now. And if you're in a job interview, you need to show up and answer questions for those job interviews. And Senator Sanders is not showing up and answering questions.
Violence or things like that in the way we do politics these days. But I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful for our future. And I'm hopeful because of the way that the candidates on this stage have carried themselves. I'm hopeful that we are going to get sick and tired of this negative way of politics and try to find that middle ground where we can build a future for all of our children, build a future for ourselves, and we can set aside these differences and be focused on that main thing. I heard this German proverb, the main thing is that the main thing remains the main thing. And the main thing here is that we each have an opportunity for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And anything that we do in our government, it should be filtered through that lens of liberty. If we're going to do it, how are we going to do it? And is it going to require force? We don't want to force people to do things. We want to work together. We want to find those things where we agree on. Once we start working on the things where we already agree, we'll know how to work on those things where we disagree.
Thank you. And Mr. Martin, you get to wrap us up today. 90 seconds.
Let me join others and thank everyone on the stage today. I've enjoyed discussing these issues with you. And Rock had a radio program, Russ, you could listen to. I listened to his program occasionally, knew a lot about his views, but I do thank everyone. I thank the Arkansas Press Association for having us and for all of you for being here. I don't know if it was maybe Dr. Jones who called this a job interview, and I think that's really applicable. I think this is a job interview in many ways, and you have to look at experience. I've served in the state legislature. I led the majority in the House. We passed Lead Arkansas, which was a legislative agenda to lower health care costs, early childhood education, accountability in state government, and decrease crime and repeat offense rates. We got significant legislation passed in each of those categories. I passed on our crime bill internet stalking of a minor, which the police use widely now to avoid child abduction. So we looked at accountability, and not only did we get things passed, but we took it throughout the state and gave an account to the people in cities throughout this state over 5 Saturdays. So you're going to need somebody who's walked through the fire and who's willing to do it again. Our state has lots of problems that can be addressed. We have a plan, Diamond Plan. We'd ask you to go to our website, jmartinforarkansas.org. I don't have time to tell you about all of that plan, but it involves economic development, community mental health, restoring staffing to our nursing homes for our seniors, and making sure that people are able to live their God-given purpose. I have a pastor's heart and a lawyer's mind, and I want to use both of them to be your next governor.
Thank you. And let me just add this, as we've come to the end of a long but interesting day. First of all, thanks to the staff of the Arkansas Press Association. These 6 Arkansans did answer our invitation. They did show up. They did answer our questions. to the best of our ability. Not everybody did that. So I think we owe them an applause and our gratitude for this.